So the next class of antiviral agent is HIV protease inhibitors. So HIV protease inhibitor, this HIV protease is enzyme. Okay, this HIV, as the name indicates, protease is responsible to break proteins, or they are responsible for the degradation of proteins, or you can say the metabolism of proteins. So protein consists of a amino acid chain. Okay, so the protease is responsible to break this amino acid chain. Okay, HIV protease is the enzyme which is present in HIV, that is the human immunodeficiency virus. Okay, so what is the function of this HIV protease is to break proteins and to make into the small parts of the peptides or proteins. Now during the protein biosynthesis, at the end of transcription, then translation, we are getting the proteins. Okay, so these proteins, they consist of some unnecessary parts, like due to the initiation codon or due to the some other amino acids which are present, which are not necessary for the growth of this cell. And it is a long chain of protein they are synthesized, so we have to break this long chain of proteins into the small parts of the proteins actually which are useful or which are necessary for the growth of cell. Already we have studied in the biochemistry part, that is the post translation modification. So after the post translation, that is the protein biosynthesis, it is necessary to convert this protein into the useful small peptides or useful small proteins. And how it can be done? With the help of enzyme protease. So protease is responsible to break the unnecessary part which are present in the proteins. Okay, so after the protein biosynthesis, the synthesized protein, they consist of some non-required amino acids. These useless amino acids and protein parts, they are needed to be removed so that we will get the useful or the required protein. So HIV protease, they also function like same. They are useful in the post-translation modification. In the post-translation modification, the lengthy protein, it is converted into the different chains of protein by breaking long chain. So similarly, in these conditions, the protein which are synthesized, and after protein biosynthesis, what we are getting or what the viral cell gets, that is the long chain of proteins. So this long chain of protein then consists of some useless or unnecessary amino acids. And if they are present in the proteins, there is a no use of that protein. They will not useful for the growth of this cell. Hence, the HIV protease enzyme is responsible to break and to convert this long chain or the lengthy chain of a protein into the small chain or the small parts which are actually useful for the growth of the cell. So that is the mechanism of action of these drugs. So examples are raltegavir. Just go through the structure. Then sanctinavir. So these are the HIV protease enzyme inhibitors. Ritonavir. So these are the three examples which comes under the HIV protease inhibitor. Now we move to the last part of the antiviral agent, that is the combination therapy for the antiviral agents. Why we require the combination therapy? Now in the combination therapy we are using the more than one regimen or more than one type of antiviral agents. Okay, so these agents, they are having the ultimate goal, that is the to kill or the suppress the growth of viruses. So when we are giving the combination therapy, suppose we give the two drugs, they will produce the synergistic effect, as both having the mechanism to kill or to suppress the growth of the virus. So they produces synergistic effect. Okay, so similar type of effect. Second part, they having different mechanism of action. Okay, generally in the combination therapy, we are not using the two or three drug regimens which having the similar type of activity. Okay, stavudine, zidovudine will not use at a same time. That is the zidovudine plus stavudine. We can use this one revert transcriptase inhibitor along with the HIV protease inhibitor. Okay, so like this, we will use the combination of drug which having the different mechanism of action, so that this drug or this combination drug therapy can act on the virus cell on different life cycle of the viruses. Okay, so if it escapes from one part, it can be killed at the other part, as the drug having the other type of mechanism of action. So first they produce a synergistic effect. Second one, they having different mechanism of action. Third one, we can reduce the dose. For example, suppose drug zidovudine. Zidovudine, if we were to give the 50 milligram, 50 milligram, it is for our consideration. Okay, if we are giving the 50 milligram and it having the side effects, suppose it having the side effects, so it will produces the desired effect, but along with that it will produces the side effects. Now if we are using the combination therapy, what happens? Suppose zidovudine and any HIV protease is there, suppose sanquinavir is there and zidovudine is there. If we are using this combination, what happens? Instead of using the 50 milligram of zidovudine, what we will do? We will reduce the dose. Suppose it is 25 milligram of zidovudine, 25 milligram of sanquinavir. So what happens? Due to the reduction of the dose, the toxicity or the side effects which are produced by these zidovudine, it will decrease. It is for our consideration. Okay, actually it is not the 50 milligram that we are giving for the antiviral agents. Okay, that means if we are using the combination therapy or in the combination, we can reduce the dose of a single regimen, so that it will produces less amount of side effects or toxicity, or it will not produce any kind of toxicity or side effects. Okay, so third is the we can reduce the dose. Next one, as we have told, we can decrease the side effects. If the dose is reduced, it will produce less amount of side effects or toxicity. One drug we have to give for 100 milligram, when we are using in the combination, the two drugs, then we have to reduce the dose of the two drugs. If for single we have to use 100 milligram, when it comes to the combination therapy, it will have the 40 or 50 milligram. Okay, so due to the reduce the amount of these agents, what happens? The side effects or the toxicity which we produce by a single regimen, it can be reduced, and so that it will decreases the side effects. And final and important, it can reduce the chances of drug resistance. So sometimes what happens? The resistance to drug develops. Okay, if we are giving a single regimen, so due to the continuous using of that single regimen, what happens? That cell or the bacteria or viral cell, it can develop a resistance to the drug. Okay, due to the developing the resistance to the drug, after some time, after continuous administration of a single drug, it will not show that activity, or it will show the less amount of activity what we are giving at the first time. So to avoid that, we can give the combination of drugs, so that the resistance to the drug will not produce, or it will be very less amount, so that the combination therapy, it can produces the significant effect. That's why we are using the combination therapy. It is in the cancer therapy also, generally in the antibiotic also, generally in these antiviral agents. That's why we are using the combination therapy. Now for the combination therapy, for the antiretroviral regimen, first line is the we are preferring these three drugs: lamivudine, zidovudine, and nevirapine. If they are not produces the effect we require, then we can give for the alternate therapy, that is lamivudine, zidovudine, efavirenz, or instead of zidovudine we can change to the stavudine, or instead of efavirenz we can using the nevirapine. So such combination or the such alternative regimens we can give if prefer regimen it will not work properly, that is the lamivudine, zidovudine, and nevirapine. Other alternate options, they are lamivudine, tenofovir, nevirapine, or lamivudine, tenofovir, efavirenz, or lamivudine, zidovudine, and tenofovir. As we are using the combination of drug therapy, as it is useful for the retroviral, so we are using the reverse transcriptase inhibitors or the HIV protease inhibitors so that they can be useful in the retroviral therapy. Next is the second line of agents. In that we can use the combination of these two parts, that is the NRTI, nucleoside reverse transcriptase inhibitors, along with the protease inhibitors. Okay, so tenofovir, abacavir plus we can use one of these ones. Similarly, diadonosin, abacavir, one of from PI component, tenofovir, zidovudine plus one of these agents, genouridine, lamivudine plus one of these agents. So that is the second line of regimens, and it is first if tenofovir, abacavir plus one of these, suppose lopinavir is there, if it will not produces the required effect, then we can go for the second, diadonosin, abacavir, then one of these agents. And if special circumstances is there, we can use the combination of didanosine plus zidovudine or didanosine plus lamivudine along with the one of the protease inhibitor. So that is the combination therapy, that is the second line combination therapy what we are using. And generally in the case of HIV protease, HIV retrovirus, what we have to give, we should avoid this combination, zidovudine plus stavudine. It may produce some kind of antagonism effect. If we are using stavudine plus didanosine, it will increase the toxicity. It produces the neuropathy. It will causes the lactic acidosis. And generally, lamivudine and didanosine, they are not additive or they will not produce the synergistic effect. Clinically, they are not proved that they are the additive agents. So in this way, we can use the. Okay, now we are moving to the next chapter, that is diuretics. Okay, so as the name indicates, the drugs which are useful to promote the diuresis, to increase the production of urine, such drugs they are called as diuretics. Okay, so the main function of these diuretic drugs to increase the urination, and through urination to increase the excretion of water and sodium ions. Okay, so what happens during the hypertension, the concentration of water, concentration of the ions, it increases. And if we have to treat the hypertension, we have to decrease this, or we have to treat the pressure, we have to decrease the pressure. So we have to reduce the level of water along with the level of ions like sodium ions from the body. आपण म्हणतो की ब्लड प्रेशर असेल तर मीठ खाऊ नका किंवा सॉल्ट खाऊ नका. ओके, ब्लड प्रेशर वाढतं. सो हे सोडियम आयन्स आहे, त्याचं कॉन्सन्ट्रेशन जर वाढले, इट इन्क्रीजेस द tension. So to decrease that tension, we have to reduce the concentration of sodium ions from the body. And how we can decrease this concentration of sodium ions? By giving the diuretics. When we are giving the diuretics, it is responsible for the diuresis, to increase the concentration of urine, and through urine there is a excretion of lot of water along with the sodium ions. Hence these diuretic agents are used. What are the uses of these diuretics? So they excrete the more amount of water and the ions to the body. They are mainly useful as to decrease the blood pressure. So it is useful in case of also the treatment of heart failure, in case of hypertension. It is also used in some case of liver damage or in case of some kidney diseases. So these are the uses. So the main use of these diuretics, that is the antihypertensive agents. So antihypertensive agents, these diuretic drugs or diuretic agents are given. Now we are moving to next part, that is the urine formation, or how the urine formation takes place in the kidney, in the nephron. Okay, actually through urine, when urine formation takes place, the necessary ions like sodium ions, potassium ions or chloride ions, fluid like water, what happens, they are reabsorbed into the blood circulation. So their concentration in the urine decreases. So what happens if their concentration in the urine decreases? Their concentration in the blood is high, but it is no problem when there is a normal condition is present. But when disease condition is present, like hypertension, it is better to remove these ions like sodium ions, chloride ions, and the fluid like water from blood into the urine, and they must be excreted through the urine or in the form of urine. Okay, so for that, for studying the diuresis, we have to first know how the urine formation takes place, what are the different parts of the nephron where reabsorption of these kind of ions takes place. Okay, so just go through this structure. This is the structure of nephron through which the urine formation takes place. Okay, uh, when filtrate comes in the Bowman capsule, they enters into the proximal tubules. This is proximal tubules. From they enters into the descending loop of Henle. Here the ascending loop of Henle. Then these are the distal convoluted tubules. Then these are the collecting tubules. So in this way, the different parts of nephron takes place. Okay, so in proximal tubules there are different channels are present. So this sodium channels the reabsorption of sodium into the blood circulation takes place. One more channel is there, that is, it is not a channel, it is actually a symporter or porter. So it consists of sodium potassium symporter. So what happens, one sodium ion and one potassium ion, it is reabsorbed into the blood circulation through this channel. Here Na plus H plus antiporter. Okay, what is antiporter? When sodium ions it enters into the blood circulation, if there is a presence of hydrogen which exit from the blood circulation and enters into the urine. Okay, so sodium ions, exit of sodium ion takes place into the blood circulation, and the entry of H plus ions or the proton takes place into the urine. So in this way, the proximal tubules is consist of different channel, symporter and antiporter. Now we will move to the next part. It is This is descending loop of Henle, from which the reabsorption of water takes place. Okay, then it goes to this part, that is the green color part. It is called as ascending loop of Henle. Okay, in ascending loop of Henle there is one symporter or coporter present, that is the 2 chloride sodium potassium porter. So through this porter, two ions of chlorides and single ion of sodium, single ion of potassium, they enters into the blood. That is the reabsorption of these ions. Then it goes to this part. It is the convoluted tubules. In this part, there is two types of channel or co-transporters are present. This is sodium chloride co-transporter. So one molecule of sodium, one molecule of chloride, together they enters into the blood. That's the reabsorption of this molecule takes place, and then a single sodium ions present, which sodium ions is responsible to undergo reabsorption process into the blood. Then from here we move to the last part, that is collecting duct. So this is important part in the collecting duct. It consists of different antiporters. Okay, so this is one antiporter, sodium H plus. So sodium enters into the urine, H plus ions, sorry, sodium enters into the blood, H plus ions enters into the urine. So that is the antiporter. This is very important. sodium potassium antiportar. This sodium potassium antiportar is driven by, or it is activated by, hormone called as aldosterone. When aldosterone is present, one molecule of sodium, it will undergo reabsorption into the blood circulation, and one molecule of, oh sorry, one ion of potassium, it enters into the urine from the blood. So this process is catalyzed by, or the activated by, or driven by hormone aldosterone. So there are again one antiportar, sodium hydrogen antiportar is there. It collecting tubules, there is the presence of ADH, that is the antidiuretic hormones. So this ADH, or the antidiuretic hormones, it is responsible to reabsorb the water molecule from the collecting tubules. So in this way, the nephron is classified, or it is divided into four parts. One is the site 1, second one is the site 2, that is the ascending loop of Henle, site 3 convoluted tubules, site 4, that is the collecting tubules. Okay, so yellow part is site 1, green part site 2, blue part site 3, and the remaining pink part, that is the site 4. So the drugs which are useful in the urine formation or increase the urination, that is the diuretics, these drugs are classified generally into the five types, but depending upon these sites, they are classified into four types. And fifth class of the diuretic, that is the osmotic diuretics, they do not comes under these sites. Okay, so the drugs which act on the site 1, they are called as site 1 diuretics, which act on site 2, that is the site 2 diuretics, which act on site 3, that is the site 3 diuretics, which act on site 4, they are called as site 4 diuretics. Now what is diuresis? So diuresis is to increase the urine formation and to excrete the urine in large amount or more amount along with the water and the different ions like sodium ions, chloride ions. Okay. Now if you observe that in site 1 diuretics there is sodium ions present, potassium ions present, as well as the sodium hydrogen antiportar is present. So if we have to increase the concentration of sodium ions or different ions and the water in the urine, we have to inhibit these channel or these porters or co-transporters. Hence, the drugs which comes under the site 1 diuretics, what their role? Their role is to block all these symporter or channels so that sodium ions it will not enter into the blood. That is the reabsorption of sodium ions or potassium ions or chloride ions does not takes place. Hence, their concentration in the urine increases and they can excrete it through the urine. Similarly, which act on site 2, they are responsible to inhibit this co-transporter. So, chloride ions, sodium ions, and potassium ions, it will remain as it is in the urine. Site 3 diuretics, that is the sodium chloride symporter. So, they are responsible to block this symporter. And due to the blocking this symporter, what happens? Sodium and chloride ions, it will remain as it is in the urine. Then site 4 diuretics. The site 4 diuretics, they are generally called as the potassium sparing diuretics. So site 4 diuretics, we have to inhibit the aldosterone, their activity, because if we inhibit the aldosterone activity, this antiporter will not work and sodium ions will remain as it is into the urine. Okay. So as per this, the diuretics they are classified into four types. First one, drugs acting on site 1, they are called as site 1 diuretics. Generally, they are acting on proximal convoluted tubules. And examples are carbonic anhydrase inhibitors like acetazolamide. The drug which act on site 2, they are called as site 2 diuretics, as it is the ascending loop of Henle or it acts on ascending loop of Henle. They are also called as loop diuretics. Then site 3 diuretics, that is the convoluted tubules, the drugs which comes under this or which produce their activity at site 3, they called as site 3 diuretics. they generally have the structure like thiazide or thiazide-like structure. So they are also called as thiazide diuretics. And site 4 diuretics in the collecting ducts, they are generally called as the potassium sparing diuretics. They consist of the aldosterone antagonist and other drugs which are responsible to decrease the concentration of sodium ions or the reabsorption of sodium ions into the blood. So in this way the classification takes place. And the fifth one, which does not comes under the different sites of the nephron, that is the osmotic diuretics. Okay, we will move into the first part of the first classification of the diuretics, that is the site 1 diuretics. For your syllabus, in site 1 diuretics, there is a carbonic anhydrase inhibitors are there. So these carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, as the name suggests, they are responsible to decrease the activity of enzyme carbonic anhydrase. Okay, so this is carbonic anhydrase. So what is the role of carbonic anhydrase? Water plus CO2, it forms carbonic acid. This carbonic acid is formed when the reaction of H2O along with the CO2 takes place. And then this H2CO3, it is dissociated into H plus and HCO3 minus. So this carbonic anhydrase, they are responsible for the conversion of water and carbon dioxide into the carbonic acid. Then this carbonic acid, in the presence of same enzyme carbonic anhydrase, it is converted again back into the water and CO2. So it performs both the functions, that is the conversion of water plus carbon dioxide into carbonic acid, and opposite, the conversion of carbonic acid into H2CO3 into the water molecule and carbon dioxide. Now, so as carbonic anhydrase perform this function as well as this function, if we are giving the carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, its step will not take place. So H2O plus CO2, it will not converted into carbonic acid, that is the H2CO3. And if they are not converted into H2CO3, they are not converted into the H plus and SCO3 minus. Similarly, this step is also inhibited. So in this way, what happens if H2CO3 is not formed? We are not getting the H plus ions. Okay, and if H plus ions have not present, what happens? This step will be inhibited. So in the site 1 diuretics or the site 1 of the nephron, what is present? There is a presence of one antiportar, that is the sodium ions. It comes into the blood, that is the reabsorption of sodium ion takes place with the replacement of H plus ions. This H plus ions, it will enters into the urine. But if H plus ions are not present due to the inhibition of carbonic anhydrase, the H2CO3, it will not convert into H plus and HCO3 minus. And if it will not convert H plus and HCO3 minus, H plus are not present, so that sodium ions will not enter into the blood, or the reabsorption of sodium ion does not takes place. So the sodium ion remain in this part, that is in the urine, in the nephron, and it can be excreted through the urine. So that is the mechanism of action of this first site 1 diuretic, that is the carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. Now SAR of this carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, the acetazolamide, that is the prototype for this group. This is the structure of acetazolamide. Okay, so the SAR indicates that the sulfamyl group, this group is necessary for the activity, and if this is necessary for the activity, we cannot substitute the nitrogen of the sulfamyl group with any other group like CH3, C2H5, or any other heterophilic group. So the SO2 NH2, it should remain as it is. There is no substitution on nitrogen. Okay, then we can substitute one of the nitrogen which is present in this ring with the CH3. If such takes place, the carbonic anhydrase inhibitory activity, it will remain as it is. For example, methazolamide. And the group which attaches, so here sulfamyl, this is sulfamyl moiety, this is the group to which sulfamyl moiety is attached. So the group which attached to the sulfamyl moiety, suppose this is a group which is attached to the sulfamyl moiety, it must possess the aromatic character. Okay, so the first part, SO2 NH2 is necessary for the activity. Second part, SO2 NH2 cannot be substituted. Third part, we can substitute the nitrogen which is present in the ring with the methyl group, for example methazolamide, which will possess the or which will retain the carbonic anhydrase activity. The next part, the remaining part other than sulfamyl group, it must consist of the aromatic character. So this is the example of acetazolamide. This is the methazolamide. In that one of the nitrogen, it is attached with the methyl group, so it is methazolamide. This is another example, ethoxyzolamide. This is brinzolamide. So these are the four drugs which comes under the carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. Okay. Then side 2 diuretics. It is also called as high ceiling or loop diuretic.